Now, what's the most unusual discovery that you've ever made whilst gardening? Well, one resident in Abbots Langley was digging away in their garden and they unearthed, wait for it, a 106-year-old headstone. It turns out it belonged to a man called Charles James Moody, who had been laid to rest in the Leavesden Hospital Cemetery in 1919. Well, let's find out more about this. I'm pleased to say that I have Martin T. Brooks on the line, founder of the Leavesden Hospital Hsitory Association. Good morning to you, Martin.
Good morning, good morning.
Morning. This sounds a perfect story for this show. It sounds absolutely crazy. So what on earth is going on here? How did this headstone end up in somebody's back garden?
Well, what we think is back in 1995 when the hospital closed and the cemetery, East Lane Cemetery, was kind of just left to its own mind, a couple of youthful boys decided that they were going to pick up one of the loose headstones and take it back to their place and, set it up back there. And from 1995, there it sat until just a couple of weeks ago where somebody who had just moved into the place was doing some landscaping and gardening, and they uncovered this headstone. So it was a pretty remarkable find, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happened to it now?
So what we did is after we were notified, we went to the resident's house and we examined the headstone and confirmed that, yes, it definitely does belong in East Lane Cemetery because we already had documentation that where Charles was originally buried within the new cemetery there. So one of my associates, Emma Frost, and I, we decided to go over there. We picked up the headstone. We brought it back over to East Lane Cemetery, and we were able to reinstate it in the area of the cemetery where Charles was originally buried back in 1919.
Gosh, but how unusual is this? Because I've never come across anything like this before. What about you?
Yeah, it has happened at least two other occasions where somebody has found a piece of a headstone or an actual headstone. One was very early on before we actually ever started working on renovating and restoring the old cemetery. Somebody called and said they'd found a headstone or a small memorial stone in the woods in front of their place. So we went over and collected it. And that little piece, marble piece, sat with me probably for 4 or 5 years in my living room. Which was a great little, yes, it's a great little conversation piece when people come over and see a headstone in your living room. So,
come over for a dinner party. Just ignore the headstone in the corner. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, don't worry about that. But yeah, so when we did do all the restoration and everything, which resulted in the uncovering of 510 cremation marker stones and 21 headstones that had been moved about in the cemetery. So we ended up with about 575. We already had about 44 names, so we knew that there were 44 people there without any stones or markers. So we ended up with a total of 575 names, and it's not unusual, but unfortunately, most of the records for the cemetery, as well as the hospital, were all lost in 1930 due to a flood of the records department at the hospital. So we don't know who exactly is buried there. So we have the only register of names that is in existence for at least 577 people that are buried in that cemetery. So it's been a very, very rewarding amount of work for us all.
I bet it has. Now, I'm just thinking out loud here, and tell me if you think I'm off the mark here, but what about a TV show, The Graveyard Detective? I mean, you could go viral with something like that, couldn't you, Martin?
I'm all up for it. Yeah, anybody wants to produce a show like that, we'll walk through the whole thing. I think it'd be an absolutely fascinating story about how we've been able to, recover and recognize 577 people that are buried there. And another segment of that TV show would probably be the new discovery where we think we've recovered another 140 names. So we are currently working on that, confirming that these are the names of people that are actually at rest in one part of the cemetery. So that's very new. That's only happened the last couple of months here that we've been able to start working on that.
So many questions here. Martin, when you first came on, you took me by surprise with your accent. If you don't mind me asking, whereabouts are you from?
I'm originally from North London.
Right.
No, actually, that's where Mom and Dad were born and raised in North London, as were their parents. And they emigrated to Canada. I was born in Canada in 1957, and then we ended up moving to Minnesota in the United States. And I was there for 47 years, but I always knew that I had to come back to where I was from. There was just something about the history and heritage of my family being here, and something about Victorian era England just absolutely fascinated me.
So all of that history, that history has kind of drawn you in to be part of the Leavesden Hospital Hsitory Association.
It really has, yeah. I mean, it started off when I started working at the park in 2008. I was just interested in, old Victorian buildings, which there were still a few around, but it wasn't long before everybody wanted to tell the new kid on the block, that this was the site of an old Victorian asylum, and across the road was a industrial school workhouse, Victorian workhouse, and Jack the Ripper was buried up in the cemetery. So I immediately went, I have to check this out. And one thing led to another, and I just realized that there's a lot of history here that people just didn't want to talk about. They really didn't want to know that. They didn't want anybody to know that their parents or they worked at this place, that hospital, and everything, because it wasn't something you talked about.
No, it's fascinating stuff. It really is. Well, I've got to leave it there for the time being, but I promise you I will be in touch, and any TV producers, sign this man up. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much for your time, Martin. All the best.
All right, thank you much. Bye-bye.
There you go. Martin T. Brooks joining us live. What an interesting man. The stuff that he's doing, extraordinary.